Greetings and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this important webinar. I'm George Friday. I am the national organizer and on the coordinating committee for United for Peace and Justice. It's our honor to host this webinar today, given the crisis going on with Israel and Palestine. We all need to keep in the know. And as with any effort for justice, we must consistently speak truth to power. But when the truth tellers are being repressed or oppressed or harassed, then we don't have access to the information needed. Today, we'll hear about the experiences with folks who are trying to be the truth tellers and the consequences of that, in addition to hearing from a U.S. person. I am now going to pass it on to Matt Vliger, who was a past staff person for UFPJ. He is my predecessor. Matt, apologies if I got your last name wrong.
That's great. Yeah, my name is Matt DeVlieger. Actually, you were my predecessor, George. I remember when I was a young activist at a member group, Campus Peace Action in Florida, and it was always exciting to see announcements coming from George. George was co-chair of the steering committee for United for Peace and Justice during some of the most important days of the Iraq War, when we were part of a very powerful global peace movement against the Iraq War and occupation. So yeah, it was great to follow in your footsteps, George, and it's an honor to be hosting this event with you. I'd also like to thank Andrew Lichterman from the coordinating committee, who's been helping put together this event as a volunteer and has put in a lot of time, energy, and to make sure that this is going off as a success. It's been difficult to round all the folks up. As you know, it's a very challenging time for many, especially the people who are most involved on the ground. One of the reasons that this came to the attention of United for Peace and Justice, I was with Jackie Cabasso, the co-convener of UFPJ at the United Nations at the end of December, and just coming from Germany, where I've been living on and off since 2014. And after October 7th, what I've witnessed there, the experience that I've had as a peace organizer, as a Jewish person, and as a member of the community was just appalling to me. And I'm not going to do too much to talk about my experience today because we've rounded up such a wonderful group of speakers to share their experiences with you from Germany. On the agenda, we have, I'm just going to go really quickly and list the names. We have Wieland Hoben, who's the Executive Director of Jüdische Stimme für gerechten Frieden in Nahost, the Jewish voice for a just peace in the Middle East. He's based in Germany. We have Yasmin Daher from Palestine spricht, as Palestine speaks, also from Germany. We have Amira Nazareddin from PA Allies, that's Palestinians and Allies, also based in Germany. We have Adam Brumberg from Artists and Allies Hebron, also in Germany, and Barbara Dugan, Esquire, from the Center on American Islamic Relations, CARE, coming from Massachusetts. So, like I said, the way we're going to do this is we're going to go around to each speaker. They're each going to have about 10 minutes to present. Followed by that, we're going to do a Q&A period. If you have questions, I'm going to ask that you put your questions, type them in the chat, and then we'll call on you to ask your questions. So right now, everyone should be muted, but when it comes to the time where we're doing the Q&A and you have a question to ask, you'll need to unmute yourself and then mute yourself again so that we can get a discussion going. It's important to me that we have people on both sides of the Atlantic speaking to really make this an international solidarity event. So like I said, I'm not going to do too much speaking. I'd like to pass it over to the speakers. And starting off is going to be Yasmin. Yasmin is a feminist writer, political philosopher, and activist. She's a member of Palestine Speaks. The group was formed as a wide coalition to counter anti-Palestinian racism and empower Palestinians in the German context. And despite their persecution and attempts to criminalize them, the group has succeeded since 2019 in intensifying and enlarging the solidarity actions and movement with Palestine and in carving out spaces of contest to speak about Palestine in our language, priorities, and discourse. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Yasmin, who'll share time with one of her colleagues.
Thank you, Matt, for the introduction, and thank you so much for organizing this. I know you did put a lot of effort into doing this panel, so many thanks again. I'm joined here by a friend, a colleague, and also a member of Palestine Speaks, Noura Rajab, which I would like also to introduce her. She's a German Palestinian migration scholar based in Berlin, with research focused on the intersections of diaspora, mobilization, conflicts, and socio-political dynamics of displacement. And given that we are joined by other comrades who are going to talk about the current situation in Germany, the crackdown on the pro-Palestinian movement, we thought that it makes sense to give a little bit of historic background. So will move to Noura, who will start to talk a little bit, few decades back, and then I'll join in, and we roll from there.
Thank you very much, Yasmin, for the kind introduction, or also for having us and discussing this topic, and also hopefully sharing some experiences. As Yasmin said, we thought it might be also a good idea to also shed a bit light on the historical context of Palestinian existence in Germany, because also the intensity of the suppression escalated since October 7. It's actually part of a historical politics of erasure, diminishing and erodating the collective existence, but also identity of Palestinians in Germany through repression, censorship, and discrimination. And we can start actually by looking at the Palestinian community. So it is believed to be the biggest Palestinian community in Europe, and also within Germany, the biggest Arab community. However, what we can say that there is no statistics actually showing the existence of Palestinians in Germany. So it's believed to be 250,000, but we have very diverging numbers. Some would say 80,000, others 100,000. And the exact figure does not exist because also Palestine as a country does not exist in the context of Germany. As Germany doesn't recognize the Palestine as a sovereign state, we find Palestinians often in different categories, which changed also over the years, and various status, such as stateless, refugees, persons of undefined nationalities. Sometimes their records are linked to their migration from the transit countries like Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, or not to speak of German or European citizens or Palestinians holding Israeli citizenship. So official numbers would say that we have 6,000 Palestinians in Germany. So this ambitious categorization, we can say, also not only obscures the data and knowledge of Palestinian life in Germany, but also contributes to their historical exclusion and marginalization. And however, when we look back to the Palestinian cause and understanding the Palestinian cause and also resistance or mobilization within the context of Germany, we have to also understand it in the context of the creation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the 60s. And the PLO historically operated predominantly from the centers of the diaspora, and it played also a crucial role in the Palestinian National Project within Germany. So Germany was also an important base for the PLO, and also the whole structures of the PLO, be it workers' organizations, student organization, women organization, were also organized within the diaspora in Germany. However, even despite this quite a big mobilization organization. Palestinians in Germany lived almost unnoticed by the public. But this changed actually with the attack on the Israel team at the Olympic Games in Munich, where actually Palestinians became a hyper visible figure and embodiment of terror and suspicion. And actually, as a result of this attack, the Ministry of Interior introduced tightened visa restrictions to Arab countries or from Arab countries. And also decided to deport a lot of Palestinians. There's around 200 to 300, always often without legal ground. And it was also a time where the Palestinian organizations such as the General Union of Palestinian Students and the General Union of Workers were banned in Germany. Also, political active Palestinians faced increased surveillance and interrogation, and especially in Western Germany. And this was also kind of a time where actually this whole repression created a climate of fear and control, and especially also for some in the older generation, resulting in the denial of their Palestinian identity to the outside world to avoid discrimination, persecution, and exclusion. So even though we think about this October 7 being kind of a moment of huge repression, we saw actually that it also started within the history, especially in the 70s. And maybe as Yasmin, when you can talk about also the BDS resolution, we saw it also continuing over time, even before.
Thank you, Nora. So I'll pick it up from here. And so fast forward to 2019, the German Bundestag, the parliament, was discussing a resolution which is not legally binding. Nonetheless, the resolution against the BDS, the boycott, divestment sanctions here in Germany, which is not legally binding, as I said, but nonetheless, it spearheaded a movement against the Palestinian community in general, and not only the pro-Palestine movement or activists. And that happened for the reason that the main reason this, well, first of all, there was no real discussion or there was no real activism of the BDS movement in Germany was not such a big movement as we know it in the United States or in the UK or in other countries. But then nonetheless, for political reasons, which we believe to understand as a starting of a harsher persecution of peace activists and human rights activists in Germany, the resolution did pass, and we see there was two effects happened after that resolution passed. One was the conflation, which I assume other members here will be talking about, the conflation between the criticism of the State of Israel, the criticism of Zionism, and anti-Semitism. And the other effect was that by proxy, any activism for Palestine was immediately understood as activism against the Jews, and was as such prohibited. At that moment in 2019, several groups and individuals came together in contestation of the BDS resolution, and they formed a wide coalition, which later on became Palestine Speaks. And since then, many events and activism has been happening. A moment in time which also saw a lot of success for this movement was in 2021, and during the month of May, when Palestinians commemorate the Nakba. This movement succeeded in bringing to the streets with other allies and other organizations around 15,000 demonstrators for the Nakba Day. And that was, to many activists, an unprecedented success in terms of numbers and show up, and also in terms of bringing progressive voices to the forefront of the Palestinian or pro-Palestinian movement, from the left, feminist, and since then, we are witnessing a deterioration or a change in the atmosphere of the how the German state is also relating to and responding to this widening and deepening movement. One of these effects was the actual prohibition of this exact demonstration, or similar demonstration, in 2022. And again, a repetition of a similar ban. And when we talk about ban, we are talking about a ban of a full week of activities. So it's not only the demonstration itself on the 15th of May, rather the movement and other actors were also organizing several other events in Berlin, and all of those events were banned. So it happened in 2 consecutive years, and other groups also tried to register events or demonstrations which they were banned also. So I'll stop here, and maybe we can develop. Maybe Noura.
I took take 30 seconds just to also read out the police statement, because I think when reading the statement, we can already see also this Orientalist threat with its constructed to speech, but also very racist nature of their argument. So the police actually justified the ban, which Yasmin was talking about, and I quote the police now, that Palestinian diaspora, as well as Muslim communities, especially from among the Lebanese, Turkish, as well as Syrian diaspora, and especially youth and young adults, are considerably tense and emotionalized. And second, this is the second argument, the Nakba commemoration events could therefore lead to potential threat to public safety. So we see that this argument is very much based on this young, angry Arab/Muslim, which they try to control through the events. And we stop by this now, but I think it was worth to mention.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, giving us a little bit of history, just so folks know, and folks who might not have been following so closely what was happening in Germany. After October 7th, the German parliament also introduced a blanket ban on any pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And many of the folks here who are leaders and organizers resisted that ban and came out to the streets anyway. So I'm sure we'll hear about that a little bit more in the presentations. Coming up next, we have Wieland Hoben, who's the chairman of Jüdische Stimme. He's a composer and academic translator, and he's also a representative, in addition to being the chairman of the Jüdische Stimme, is a representative in the umbrella groups, European Jews for a Just Peace and International Jewish Collective for Justice in Palestine. He'll speak on challenging Zionism and racism within Germany and Jewish public life, Germany's desire to define good Jews and bad Jews, and their performance to distance themselves from the Holocaust, and the competition for representation among Jews in Germany. Wieland, it's you.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for inviting me to this event. Jewish life in Germany, that's a phrase that gets bandied about a lot by politicians, and it's not, I think, often reflected on what that really means, because the Jewish population of Germany is pretty small. It's a bit over 200,000. Some estimates go up to maybe 220,000. It's slightly difficult because probably about half of the Jewish population is registered with synagogues. You know, that's the only way to really verifiably count, and the rest is not affiliated in this way. And the significance of Jews, obviously, because of the Holocaust, is a slightly spectral one, because the actual numbers of Jews are very small, but the knowledge of having exterminated 6 million Jews and of this being a defining feature of Germany's modern history, this gives a very strong historical significance to the Jews as an idea, as a category, and not actually as a diverse array of individual people and types. And because the Jewish community is small, many Germans also have had no contact with Jews, and this facilitates a condition in which Jews are something exotic. And because the supposed lesson from the Holocaust is that this anti-Semitism was really the ultimate evil in recent German history, getting over that evil is just the necessary step in a kind of historical redemption process. And the shortcut, you might say, the quick fix for overcoming that past is to identify with and more or less uncritically support Israel, taken as the representative of all Jews, the Jewish state, which is the thing as which it presents itself. And I mean, the tradition of relations with Israel goes back to the 1950s, when the first post-war chancellor of Germany, Konrad Adenauer, said that it's very important to take up political relations with Israel because, I quote, "one should not underestimate the influence of the Jews." And he was talking about realpolitik. He was saying that for Germany to be rehabilitated as an actor on the world stage, it needs to demonstrate that it has overcome its Nazi past, basically. And first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, he was perfectly willing to participate in that for the benefits of reparations and then arms deals and so on. And it was only somewhat later, around the 80s, that it became this kind of morality to demonstrate one's support for Israel. And as I say, for many Germans, Jews are not a part of everyday experience. And so they rely on these kinds of abstract ideas to inform what they think constitutes Jews and what supports Jews also, how one should fight anti-Semitism. And if the dominant narrative is that supporting Israel is a way to fight anti-Semitism, then many people who are not very politically informed will assume this, and also quite a few people assume that any Jew in Germany has some sort of connection to Israel, or maybe is from Israel. There's often just a lack of basic information, a lack of perception. And these things all make it easier for people who want to push the Zionist narrative to exert influence, because many people aren't informed enough to say, for example, that there have always been Jews who rejected and resisted Zionism, both before and after the Holocaust, both before and after the State of Israel was founded. And because the German narrative, the redemption narrative, relies on this identification with Israel, this also means it can't accept the idea that Israel is a flawed and unjust project and state. And because this entire narrative has to be upheld, this also means that those those Jewish groups or organizations that the state wishes to work with and to support will be pro-Zionist ones. And that's what the Jewish mainstream is in Germany. Of course, that's also the case in the US or the UK, but in Germany, I would say that the hegemony of the Zionist narrative in Jewish organizations is much stronger, that there is much less questioning of that from within the Jewish community. So we in the Jüdische Stimme, we have often had attacks from the Jewish establishment, and their main argument, apart from whether they call us pro-terror or anti-Israel or whatever, is that we're not representative, that we're just a small fringe group, and that we are not authorized to speak as Jews in any way. And of course, it's sadly true that that we are a minority, that Jews with this position, this political position, are a minority in Germany. But nonetheless, there are many Jews in Germany who don't share the dominant Zionist narrative, but who are not involved in activism and quite possibly want to avoid being drawn into debates on this subject in general, because we all know this is a very toxic issue and that one has to be open to a certain amount of conflict if one wants to get involved in it. So I would say that there is a kind of unknown number of sympathizers with a non-Zionist or anti-Zionist agenda among the Jewish community, but that many of them don't come forwards. And it's interesting that since October the 7th, we have had a considerable influx of new members, and most of these were people who were not politically organized before that. They were part of this kind of shadow group that hadn't been speaking out. And they felt now that with the just intense escalation of both pro-Israel, pro-genocide support, and also anti-Muslim racism and anti-migrant racism in Germany, that they had to somehow take a stand, not just as activists, but as Jewish activists. And especially when the idea of the Jewish community or Jewish life is being pitted by the establishment against migrants or Muslims, because the dominant narrative already in the middle of October was that Jews in Germany are at risk from all these violent Islamist Arabs, migrants. And the statistics, unfortunately, about anti-Semitism are unusable pretty much, because those things which are registered as anti-Semitic incidents basically can range from a graffiti about Palestine to someone being violently attacked. And many of the things that flood these statistics are just some sorts of statements or signs or slogans about Palestine. And it's clear that there was some increase in hostility and that there were, for example, attacks on some Jewish memorials. But the true level of anti-Semitism, I'm quite convinced, was not that it was actually, it's very difficult to say what it was, simply because we don't have any reliable statistics here. I know Germany's not alone in this, but this creates a serious problem also in dealing with genuine anti-Semitism, because if we don't even have enough facts, I mean, except for one fact we know, which is that over 80% of anti-Semitic crimes are committed by the far right. But the problem is that the whole monitoring system is not neutral. And we'll hear later also about the role of the so-called anti-Semitism commissioners in promoting this whole distortion of facts. Okay, time's up. Thank you.
Thanks, Phelan, for giving us an idea of Jewish life, especially as a representative of many critical Jewish voices. I have to say that among the Palestinian organizations, it's been great to see a handful of Jewish folks out there early on getting detained for using words like genocide, using words like ceasefire, using words like apartheid or occupation, words that are now being more and more used by mainstream sources as what's happening has become completely obvious. So it's been great to be around courageous voices. I think I'm gonna ask later on. I think there were particular events where Jüdische Stimme was actually accused of being anti-Semitic or in cahoots with anti-Semitism. So I'd like to delve into that a little bit later. But coming up next, we have Amira Nazaruddin from PA Allies. Amira is a 28-year-old Palestinian from Berlin involved with the activist collective PA Allies. Alongside her role as a pharmacist, she's currently pursuing studies in communication and sociolinguistics at Freie Universität Berlin, driven by her passion for social justice and community empowerment. Amira, are you with us?
Hi, Matt. Thank you. I'm with you.
Thank you.
So first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. And also I want to thank the audience to engage with that case in Germany, that case of censorship when it comes to the pro-Palestine movement. First of all, I'll just give a little insight on our work so you know from which perspective I'm talking now. So we're an activist collective of 10 volunteers. We're Palestinians and Palestine allies. And what we do is mostly on a weekly basis, we organize protests and rallies in Berlin. But also we try and do some educational work through social media about the situation in Gaza, the oppression of Palestine solidarity, of the Palestine solidarity movement in Germany, and also a bit of insight to the Palestinian culture. And also we do some inner community work with the youth that attends our protests. We assist them with German bureaucracy. Some of them don't have a German passport yet. And so attending a demonstration for them is it even puts them in danger of losing their right to stay here in Germany. Maybe you might be interested in what specifically is or are symbols and chants and words that are being banned in Germany, and therefore you get a fine for Volksverhetzung, which is I don't know the English word. I'm sorry, but it's not a you know, tiny thing. It is a major fine. So some of the forbidden chants and are, first of all, the From the River to the Sea one, and every variant of it, may it be English, may it be German, may it be Arabic, but also on our demonstrations there have been detentions of people that have variants of it, naming water bodies in Berlin. So it was from the from one river to the other river, that, you know, from Spree to Havel, things like that. They got even arrested for that. Then also another term that is banned is Palestine to victory. the term intifada at all in any context is forbidden, even if it's written on a sign. Then also some of the Arabic chants that have a long tradition in pro-Palestine protests in Berlin. Also, the police always gets an interpreter for all demonstrations to translate all Arabic chants. And when the first flower massacre happened on February 29th, we organized a spontaneous protest, and the police couldn't get an interpreter in time, so they forbid us to chant in Arabic at all. So when it comes to police harassment and violence for march demonstrations, that in nearly every protest we organized, the police tried to change our routes beforehand without any possible reason. Sometimes, or especially when we got closer to the inner part of the city, or where our protests would be in touristy areas, and also whenever they felt like our protest would cross Jewish marked neighborhoods, which is, however, we knew our rights, and we got lawyers, and we pulled lawsuits to maintain our initial route, so they won't get changed. But this is also one side of the intents of the police to restrict us. When it comes to the persecution of activists, also in our group, there have been visits by the police at the private homes of the activists without any reasons, just warning them to attend certain protests. Also, the police takes away activists from demonstrations only when they walk among them, without any reason other than that they looked similar to someone wanted by the police. Yeah, that's a typical move. And also, they were taking away activists, accusing them of wearing forbidden symbols that are linked to terrorist organizations, only to later let them out because they mistake the symbol for another. For example, it is always the symbol of the fist that is often misinterpreted as a symbol of a terrorist organization. However, what is also very concerning is that the Palestine solidarity is heavily censored at Berlin universities, followed by media smear campaigns. So what happened at my university, I think Matt mentioned that I was studying at Freie Universität Berlin, is that they organized an occupation of a lecture hall, and it was approved by the university president. So the reason for that was that the Freie Universität, like other big universities of Berlin, published one-sided solidarity statements with Israel, not mentioning any kind of solidarity with the Palestinian civilians. So there has been this occupation of the lecture hall where I was supposed to hold a speech there talking about what it feels like to be a Palestinian student at a university that does not create rooms for us and does not show solidarity. But what happened before I even got to speak, speaks for itself. So the Berlin Senator for Domestic Policies called the police upon us. It was about 100 cops that violently dragged us out, even though we did nothing other than have a lecture hall with panels, speeches, workshops. Followed by that, there was a media smear campaign on the Palestine solidarity movement in universities, accusing those movements of anti-Semitism. Also, they accused us of not letting Jewish students attend our lecture hall, and which is not true. We had Jewish speakers as well. They just didn't let those in that started to tear down the boards and signs the students prepared for the lecture hall and things like that. But then later on in the media, they were accused of not allowing Jewish students to attend the lecture hall, which is not true. Also, I think I'm running out of time. Am I?
You have another minute probably.
Okay. So end of the story is that now on 26th of March, there will be a discussion about applying a law that would allow the university to kick us all out for anti-Semitic incidents we did. So for now, we're afraid of losing our spot in the university. Yeah, and that's all about my personal experience, or it was even just a tiny bit of it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Amira. And I have to say that all the speakers are quite humble because what they're doing is very courageous work. And I think we haven't barely touched the surface of the intensity, the severity, and the day-to-day harassment that's happening through basically every institutional level. I'm glad that Amira brought up the media. I hope we could talk more about that later. But it's also something that exists throughout the left, this total support for Israel. And there's a term called anti-Deutsch that I didn't know about before these events. And I hope we can kind of get into what that means later. But until then, we have a couple more speakers. I think we're going to have a fun discussion, fun about a serious issue. When I say fun, I mean interesting. But then the next speaker is Adam Broomberg. Adam, I pieced together this bio from speeches and discussions I've heard you give. But Adam is a photographer, son of a Holocaust survivor. He was fired from a teaching job at a university over his criticism of Zionism. He's been under attack by various non-Jewish German anti-Semitism commissioners. His work as an artist has been deplatformed, and he'll offer a unique viewpoint on the challenges faced by individuals in arts and culture in Germany.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for this invitation. It's really lovely to put faces to some of the comrades I've seen their work.
Adam, really quickly, is there something that you can do to improve the quality of your microphone? It's a little muffled.
Is that better?
If you move it a little closer, it might be even better.
Is that better now?
It's slightly better.
Okay.
Yes.
So first of all, just to say thank you. Second of all, I run an NGO between Berlin and Hebron with the renowned human rights defender Issa Amro, who's based in H2 Hebron. But I'd like to talk more from a personal perspective. Matt touched on it, but my grandparents escaped the Holocaust and arrived in South Africa in the 1930s. And what I always say is interesting about that is they boarded the boat as the oppressed, as Jews from Lithuania and that region. And the minute they stepped onto kind of ground in South Africa, they transitioned from Jews to white people and became the oppressors. And I think that that's something really important and kind of feeds into the psyche that we're talking about. I was also sent to a Jewish Zionist school from the age of 6 to 18. But because I had older siblings, I became an anti-apartheid activist at around 15. And once the kind of ideological input I was being given every day in South Africa about apartheid, suggesting that the end of apartheid would mean the end of the existence of white people in South Africa, the similar ideological language I was being given and fed about Zionism, which is that the end of the nation state of Israel would mean the end of Jewish people, they both kind of collapsed for me at the same time. I just want to go briefly and expand a little bit on what Matt was saying has been my experience predominantly over the last 2 years. Israel-Palestine is not a new space of activism for me. I did my first book with Eyal Weizman back in 2005 that looked at various aspects of the occupation. But now, a year and a bit ago, I returned from London after my mother, who was a second-generation Holocaust survivor, she had passed away. And I arrived back in Germany, and to find myself mentioned in pretty much every official newspaper, both respected and kind of, broadsheets and less respected. And I was being called by one of the commissioners of anti-Semitism, which all but 2 states in Germany has a commission of anti-Semitism. This one was from the state of Hamburg. His name is Stefan Henschel. And because I was a professor for the 6 years prior to that in Hamburg, I found myself being accused of being anti-Semite and for advocating for terrorism against Jews. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, some of you might know that all commemorations of the Nakba were banned for the last 2 years. And Jüdische Stimme last year organized a commemoration of the Nakba as a Jewish organization to provide a platform for Palestinian voices. And at that demonstration, I was really violently arrested by a number of riot policemen. And I now face 3 different criminal charges. So one being hate crime, the other is resistance of German authority. And the third is for calling this Commission of Anti-Semitism something I won't say here, but on social media. And the third thing is to mention that because I'm an artist as well as an educator, an exhibition that had absolutely nothing to do with the occupation was cancelled. And most recently, I was given a visiting professorship in Karlsruhe University, and that lasted all of 1 week before the right-wing press and the German government kind of put so much pressure on the rectorate of the university that they were faced with no option but to terminate my contract or risk actual, in their words, closure of the institution. I just want to address 1 or 2 things that Wieland said, and maybe to push it a little bit further, because the common understanding is that, as Wieland said, the outcome of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, seems to have become, certainly in Germany, the need to show absolute support for the nation state of Israel, no matter what happens. And there's this idea that, free Palestine from German guilt, and that it's all about guilt of the Holocaust. And I have said something, and I do believe in something slightly more contentious and a little bit stronger, is that we know that negotiations went on in the 1930s between the Nazi Party and Zionists because they shared a common goal, which was to get the Jews out of Europe. And I would go further and argue that the denazification program never really happened. And that what we're seeing here, what's being done predominantly to the Palestinian community and to their allies, be they Jewish or whatever their ethnic kind of identity is less about guilt and it's more about German desire. And I truly believe that if we dig deeper, there's a real a desire for Germany to be a Christian white nation state. And I know that is a contentious thing to say, but I think that it's important not to just stop with the notion of guilt. I think that's it. I mean, I want to say that my particular kind of minestrone, what makes me up, which is having experienced apartheid firsthand, understanding what apartheid is, having spent a lot of time in Palestine. Also, the fact is that I have a sibling who lives in Israel and is a Zionist. So that particular kind of strange minestrone gives me a particular podium from which to speak. And I think that because these commissioners of anti-Semitism and the German government are using all the apparatus they have at their disposal to silence us, which is, criminal proceedings, get rid of your job, cancel your exhibitions. All it says to me is that something I and something we are doing is working and as much as possible, we need to just ignore these apparatus because they're just trying to silence us. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Adam. As you were talking about what you thought was contentious, Germany and it trying to be a white Christian nation, also them trying to silence us, there has been a lot of finger pointing from the institutions with anti-Semitism as the claim. And there's been, from my perception, the desire to point the finger at the Muslim and Arab communities as potentially being the source of anti-Semitism and trying to divide the critical Jews and Muslims who've been rising up against Israel's atrocities in Gaza and Palestine. And it's something that we have not allowed them to do, but I hope we can talk a little bit more about that in the discussion as well. Some of the demonization and replacement of anti-Semitism with Islamophobia by even mainstream politicians and threats of deportation that go along with it. So I hope we can talk about that in the discussion. The last speaker that we have, and it looks like we're coming right up on the first hour, so pretty okay on time, which should give us good time for discussion. But our last speaker is coming from the United States to try to draw the link between the transatlantic solidarity and the movements on both sides of the ocean. Barbara Dugan, Esquire, brings over 20 years of experience as a civil rights attorney in Boston. She was formerly director of the Project to Combat Racial Violence at the Boston Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, representing victims of hate crimes, police misconduct, and discrimination in housing and public accommodations. Most recently, she ran the Massachusetts Office of Families Against Mandatory Minimums, whereas the Massachusetts Project Director, her legislative advocacy helped to reform harsh drug sentencing laws that overwhelmingly impacted minority communities. She was also one of the organizers of a 9/11 legal response network in conjunction with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the ACLU, and National Lawyers Guild, where she presented Know Your Rights talks at mosques and developed attorney referral lists and a help hotline. I'm sure that's only a short summary of the things that you've done, Barbara, but looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks for being here. Barbara, you're muted. You'll need to unmute yourself. I'm still
Not
not hearing.
yet.
No, give it another shot.
Okay, am I okay now?
Got you
Yes.
now, yeah.
There's always one in every group who can't figure out how to do this stuff, and it's me. So yes, thank you so much. I'm the legal director of the Massachusetts office of the Council on American Islamic Relations. Huge disclaimer here. I'm not an activist. At least I don't consider myself an activist, and I'm not a leader in what's going on like many of the other speakers and the folks in the audience. Thank you all for the incredible work you do. Instead, I am a boring old lawyer who sits at her desk day in and day out. And in addition, the organization I work for, CARE, is not a Palestinian rights organization. However, since October 7th, my office has been flooded with calls from activists day in and day out. So I think that I can at least give you a sense of what's happening in Massachusetts and in many other American cities. So what I'm giving you here is raw data, and we can talk about what this means during the discussion. So since day one, October 7th, my office saw a flood of requests for help on three fronts: colleges and universities, in the workplace, and an increase in hate crimes against Muslims. First, the colleges and universities, which have probably gotten the most attention. This has been an intense backlash from the universities themselves, as well as from donors, big wealthy donors, and from outsiders, but eventually even from the United States Congress. Harvard University basically exploded right away when over 30 student groups issued a public statement that held Israel responsible for the violence that was taking place. Now, here's a quick note about Harvard for those of you who aren't American. Fairly or not, whatever happens at Harvard gets an extraordinary amount of attention. And related to that is the fact that Harvard is also a favorite target of those who are either anti-academia or anti-intellectual. So as a result, the president of Harvard, along with the heads of two other major universities, were called to testify before the United States Congress about anti-Semitism on the college campus. Long story short, she was vilified for her responses, and she eventually resigned her position. But I want to focus really more on the students who don't have the resources that the former president of Harvard has. The backlash against student activism has been on a national level. There have been calls for students to be expelled for merely signing pro-Palestinian statements, and pledges from large corporations and law firms to never hire those students who are associated with any of those statements. To the best of our knowledge, students have not yet been expelled, but this is a kind of pressure and outrage that activists are facing. Some students did have job offers rescinded, but mainly the students are facing two kinds of backlash, which is academic sanctions and criminal charges. The academic sanctions are ostensibly for the manner in which students have protested Israel's actions and United States support. The big question, of course, is, are universities treating pro-Palestinian activists more harshly than, say, environmental activists or Black Lives Matter activists or some other group? We don't know yet, as these disciplinary hearings are still playing out, but it certainly at this point seems to be true. Some students are also facing, and not only just students, but anyone who's been out in public, are facing criminal charges, again, ostensibly for the manner in which they protested. But again, the same questions remain. Are they being treated more harshly and singled out as opposed to other activists? And again, we don't yet know because these cases are just playing out. The second front is workplace issues. And this was actually the area in which we've seen the highest demand for help. Initially, many companies and corporations issued statements saying, "We stand with Israel," which acknowledged the fear and trauma of their Jewish employees, but completely ignored the fear and trauma among their Arab, Palestinian, and Muslim employees. The second greatest need was not only just responding to these company statements, but it was much more about employees being sanctioned for posting their views about Gaza, typically on their personal social media platforms. So a quick note about American freedom of speech. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution only protects against government sanctions for what someone says. It does not apply to private entities, which means that in the private workplace, in most situations, there is no legal protection for political speech. So the same claim was made against these employees that you've already heard discussed here, which is that criticizing Israel is, by definition, anti-Semitism. Second quick note about American employment law. Up to now, that definition has never been a part of our employment discrimination laws, nor have those laws ever been interpreted as including such a definition. There's some effort being made now to do that, but at this point, it doesn't exist. Nevertheless, employees in Massachusetts and across the country really have been warned or disciplined or even fired due to their activism. The third front has been hate crimes and harassment. The abuse that we've seen directed against our clients, and I think this is probably true pretty much across the United States, has been two kinds. Some Muslim victims were targeted and accused of supporting Hamas simply for being Muslim. As I'm sure you know, in Chicago, Illinois, a 6-year-old boy was stabbed to death and his mother seriously injured. Here in Massachusetts, our clients have been physically attacked, spit upon, threatened, and menaced. Other victims have been targeted specifically for supporting Palestine. These would typically be people who are wearing a keffiyeh or displaying the Palestinian flag, or again on their social media posts. As you probably undoubtedly heard, in the state of Vermont, north of where we are, 3 college students who were wearing keffiyehs were shot. All 3 survived, but 1 will probably remain paralyzed. Here in Massachusetts, a young woman was physically attacked by a coworker. Another man was chased with someone with a pair of scissors. I have a client whose car was smeared with feces, and many, many others received death threats. So that is a very quick summary of what we've seen here in Massachusetts, and I think it plays out fairly similarly across the United States. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Folks, we're coming upon the time where we're going to begin the Q&A. So if you do have questions, please start entering them into the chat, and then I'll call upon the folks to read their question. If you can, please just do a quick introduction. Let us know where you are, or if you're part of a United for Peace and Justice member group, let us know your group's name and where it's based. So you can begin. We also have a couple folks from the organizations represented here. We have Udi Rutz, who's been a monumental organizer in Berlin, but having an impact probably on the work that we're doing throughout Germany. Udi is a student and was also terminated from their job for being outspoken. A couple of the things that I wanted to touch on in the discussion, like I said, I'm sure probably since this is a US-based audience, and if I had being in Germany for so long, was not really sure what anti-Deutsch was until these events started to transpire. It'd probably be interesting for folks to understand what anti-Deutsch means and how it exists, even among the progressive left in Germany. And seeing that as we don't have any questions yet, maybe Udi, if you could share a little bit about your experience. I know that you were working at the Jewish Museum and you experienced some discrimination there. You've also been an organizer as a student and also with Jüdische Stimme. The other thing that I touched on before was the whole incident with Oyun as Jüdische Stimme was preparing for its 20th anniversary commemoration, which turned into, I want to say shit show, so I'm just going to say it, shit show, a total institutional shit show that really showed what Germany and Berlin representatives are all about. So I know that's a range of things, but Udi, if you can maybe step in and talk about these things, I'm sure you're the right person to do it.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the incredible speakers before me. It's always fascinating to hear and from your own experience and to realize the dimensions and the resolution of the oppression that we're all experiencing at the moment. And also keeping in mind that we're all going through this together. And I think we are all growing stronger throughout this experience. I can offer a bit of insight about my own experience at the Jewish Museum regarding the questions of to explain what anti-Deutsch is. I think there are individuals who are more qualified than me to do so, so I'll leave it for them. I was working at the Jewish Museum during last year. I was one of the few Jewish workers there, actually. Most of the individual working in this institution are non-Jews themselves. I'm underlining this because it's quite a revealing fact that Jews not very often have access to define in our own terms what Jewishness means and how we live our life as Jews in today's Germany. I was fired from the Jewish Museum as I was specializing in giving tours about the topics of Jews in Germany after 1945, after the end of the Second World War. And within the exhibition, there is a specific room that offers different insights that touch upon the triangle Jews, Germany, and Israel. And me, as a Jewish individual who grew up in Israel and live nowadays in Germany, I usually shared from my own experiences about the reasons also why I decided to come to Berlin specifically, not to Germany, but specifically to Berlin. And one of the reasons that I explained there is that there is an ongoing systematic oppression by Jewish populations toward the non-Jewish population, specifically towards Palestinians who live between the river to the sea. And I talk specifically during the tour, giving examples of this systemic oppression, where I talk specifically about the living reality of individuals who live in the area of the West Bank. In this context, I make it very clear that any human rights organizations who has been studied this topic came to the same conclusion, namely at stake is a regime of apartheid. To my surprise, for using the term apartheid, I was told that I'm not allowed to work at the Jewish Museum anymore. I want to try to offer my own theoretical perspective towards this, to try to understand what is happening, what is this reality that unfolds in front of us. To my understanding is, I agree with what Adam Brumberg said before, Germany has never come to terms with its own Nazi past. Nazification is not in decline, but it's an ongoing, actually, process. To my understanding, especially, it becomes clear throughout the last 6 months of the ongoing genocide. And to my understanding, what we are witnessing is how Germany claims to protect Jews as such, but in fact fails miserably to do so. The only Jews who Germany is willing to take care of or to show some solidarity with are those Jewish subjects who are also willing to defame Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians. And those Jews who fail to uphold to this racist legacy that Germany wishes to promote are targeted as deviate and are made deviant by the political elite of Germany. To my understanding, it's very similar to the discourse where we know about around pinkwashing, homonationalism, which is entangled with notions of homonormativity and heteronormativity. For this reason, I will just offer these three concepts of Judeo-nationalism, of Judeo-normativity, and queered Judaism. And this is where I understand where we are at, those Jews who speak to you here today. So this is what is on my heart to share with you. And I'm happy to engage in the conversation.
Thank you, Udi. Again, folks, if you have questions, now's the time to put them in the chat. If we have time, we can turn this into more of a discussion. We were expecting that we'd probably have a lot of questions. In the meantime, I do want to talk a little bit more about the Islamophobia and how the Islamophobia has been targeted kind of as a tool or a lever, also in a way that just average white Germans have been almost absent from the demonstrations and discussions, at least at the time that I left, which is now a few months ago. I have not been back, and maybe there's some reason for it after my experience. But before we get into that, can someone please, since I've asked a couple times without directly asking, would someone like to step up and define what anti-Deutsch is? I'd also like to first draw, like Udi was saying, that the majority of the folks working at the museum, the Jewish museum, were not Jewish. I think also, as Adam was talking about these anti-Semitism commissioners, I don't know if they're Jewish, but I've heard that many of them are not, maybe most, I don't know. But if someone could, Wieland, would you like to explain what anti-Deutsch is? Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, like is maybe not the word, but I'll give a quick rundown. The term was coined right after German reunification at the start of the 90s because, Germany became bigger, right? It wasn't just West Germany that was the Western capitalist power. It was the whole country again. And some people with a leftist anti-nationalist agenda rightly saw that this harbored a considerable danger for a resurgence of German nationalism, not just at a societal level, but also at a potentially imperialist level. And so they called themselves, anti-Deutsch, anti-German, to make this point. Which obviously from a leftist perspective, this is entirely valid. But the way they went about this, though, was essentially to use the logic that basically that the antithesis of German nationalism has to be the goal. And what they chose as the antithesis of German nationalism was, well, firstly, Anglo-American imperialism. One of their early slogans was "Bomber Harris, do it again," referring to the destruction of Dresden by Bomber Harris and his air crew. And another one was "Never Again Germany." And those were the sort of negative definitions, and then the positive thing was also that because anti-Semitism was one of the main signifiers of the Nazi past, that this had to be replaced by some form of philo-Semitism. And as I was saying earlier, the most obvious kind of shortcut to philo-Semitism was support for Israel. And this soon also, the difference between a kind of liberal pro-Israel position is that these were actually people coming from kind of anarchist, autonomous left groups. These were not some people drinking the latte left, as some people like to call them. These were people sort of living in squats and something, right? And so this was very strange to see this kind of pro-imperialist rhetoric from them. And over time, what's happened is that some of that ideology has taken more academicized forms, which have then sort of become institutionalized as people then would, learn these things at university and then maybe go into either teaching in academia themselves or maybe some sort of political or bureaucratic career. And so these things became mainstream in a in this less jarring form, right? So then it wasn't these kind of anarchic activists, but actually quite streamlined people who would be citing Frankfurt School thinkers to justify their claims. And also the philo-Semitism would lead to a kind of theory in which actually they, the kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy thinking that had been crucial to anti-Semitism, they became so focused on it that I would say they actually internalized it in a way, so that for them any reference to things to certain tropes which had been associated with anti-Semitism, it's like they couldn't even imagine these things without the anti-Semitic connotation. So for some, even though they claim to be leftists, even to speak out against capitalism, they would suggest that when people say capitalist, they actually meant Jews. And so that therefore that anti-capitalism was actually almost inherently anti-Semitic. So, I mean, I could, we don't need to go into all the various offshoots of this. But suffice it to say that Germany the German left is a bit different from other lefts in that you find a lot more pro-Israel ideology than you would expect from people who otherwise have, even far left positions, and that's something of a divide in the German left between anti-imperialist and anti-Deutsch ideologies.
And they're not going to allow any logic to change their minds, is what I found.
Yeah, well, they're not interested in facts because the worship of Israel has nothing to do with facts. It's abstract. So, whether it's genocide or not isn't even the point. It's just a kind of a logical impossibility that Israel could commit genocide, because that is something, that's something that's clearly negative, and Israel can't do that.
Gunter Schenk has a question. Gunter, I'll ask you to ask the question, but maybe instead of directing it to Udi, we can also hear from some of the members of PA Allies and Palestine Speaks. Gunter, are you unmuted?
Yes, I would like to have the answer of Udi. About his experience with German legal system. Can he be defended? Can he have his rights for free speech? Does he not? I must say, I'm German national living in France, in Strasbourg, France. I'm committed to the Jewish Palestine matter with the Jewish Voice for Peace in France, UJFP, Union Juive Française pour la Palestine. Merci. Excuse me. I switched to French. Excuse me. Did you get it, Udi?
I got it. Thank you so much for the question.
I just changed it.
Pleasure to meet you, Gunther. Thank you for the question. I will answer it very briefly because I was the working relationship I had with the Jewish Museum Berlin was based on a freelance agreement. For this reason, the determination of this working relationship is not regulated legally. But I can answer theoretically towards about the question that you raised about freedom of speech in Germany. Luckily, the basic law in Germany was written shortly after the collapse of Nazi Germany. So we can say that the German basic law indeed is the only reason why nowadays we can still claim our space on the street, despite ongoing attempts of the political elite of Germany to take this very basic right away from us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question from Ramona.
Sorry, Matt, can I add to it?
Oh yeah, please.
One aspect to the legal aspect, because what I think is interesting, like what Yasmin mentioned, the BDS resolution, it's not a legal foundation, no? So it's actually not entrenched in the law. And the same happens actually when Amira was saying the different things you are not allowed to say. It can happen on a daily basis, no? So we would go to a protest and you would not know which word is not allowed to say anymore, no? Sometimes genocide was not allowed, sometimes other things are not allowed. So often this is a police direction, like instruction, no? You could go, and some have done it. I don't remember what it is, Marburg. In one city, for example, they have been made a legal case against the From the River to the Sea accusation that's anti-Semitism, and also kind of the actions by the police in response to it. And the court actually ruled that it's not per se anti-Semitic. So what happens is actually that most of the repression is not entrenched in legal, in legal frameworks, no? But it's still intimidating, no? And still the police can act on it, and you can take it to the court, but it takes, of course, long time to fight this, no? But I think it's really important to understand that it's most of the time not entrenched in any laws.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't see you raising your hand, so I'll keep an eye on it. My eyes were on the chat. George, did you have your hand up? Did you want to contribute something?
I have a question. I don't know if it's contributing anything because I like the conversation as it's going. But I did have a question or an inquiry that I'd like to hear responses from Adam and possibly Udi. Adam mentioned this, but didn't name it in the same way I might. And Udi did as well. And that is the role and what I would see as the root of one of our many problems in terms of conflict and war, and that's white supremacy. So I would like to hear if you can share, any of the folks could share, that root, that evil viper affects so much, and I wonder what it looks like where you are. Thanks.
I'd like to open that up to Yasmin or Amira first if they'd like to speak, since it's been a while since we've heard from them. Then all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Did I get it right? Like, in what kind of way white supremacy affects us where we are?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So how much time do you have?
You probably got 3 or 4 minutes, honestly.
So, all right. Yeah, you feel it on a daily basis. Like when you're looking for a new accommodation, a new flat, those with German names are preferred. Looking for a job. Once someone called me because of my application on a job and was like, oh, so your name is Mrs. Nasser. No, this is not gonna work. So things like that. Also, oftentimes I work in a pharmacy. Oftentimes it is people asking me whether I learned what I'm doing or not, or just questioning my competence in the field, or even asking me if I was a cleaner and if I could get some colleagues.
Wow,
Yeah,
Amira, that sounds
it's very,
crazy.
yeah,
It sounds like
it
what Black
really is.
people dealt with in the 50s and 40s, and it's a trip. And I appreciated, Adam, you're saying that your family that escaped being oppressed stepped on the land in South Africa and became white, therefore the oppressors. Don't hear that every day. Thank you.
And if someone could also speak to, like I said, the scapegoating that's going on. I think the folks in the United States probably don't have a view of this, the scapegoating that was happening after October 7th, and also the media's role in this. I remember going to one of the earliest demos where I didn't know what I would find. After being there for a few minutes, I found that the demonstration was being shut down, that the police were starting aggression. And then when I read about it in the newspaper the next day, I read that the people that attended the event were so terrible that they were holding their baby carriages and using their strollers as human shields. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that was being reported in the media. But there was also threats coming around about the same time about increasing deportations. And I'm sure that this affects immigrant and migrant communities living in Germany. Would somebody please speak to that and try to give a little bit of an idea? Because I really don't think that the folks on the other side of the pond have a view of this. Adam, is your hand up? You can just unmute yourself. And then also Yasmin,
Yeah.
if you speak after Adam.
So maybe I can address also the former question, because if we look at the German, the Berlin state actual political and financial policy, last July, it went largely unnoticed, but the German police instituted a law whereby everybody who entered a public swimming pool last summer had to show ID. And essentially, this was a way of racially profiling anyone who was going into a public swimming pool. And accompanied by that was a law that no more than two men, and you read into this, two men of color, were allowed to gather at any one moment. And the excuse was that there was the crime rate was going up, or there were incidents of crime in these public swimming pools. When we actually look at the police reports between 2019 and 2022, incidents of had really gone down. The second thing is to look at investment on the Berlin state. There was a deduction of 24 million, I think, euro for two areas. One is Kreuzberg and one is Neukölln, which are well known as areas where a lot of migrants are, and essentially people of color. So that points again to this kind of state-sanctioned kind of, again, kind of white supremacist policy, both in economic and political terms. The second, and just to address, Matt, the role of the media. So I mentioned being arrested at the Nakba commemoration, and within an hour, on the front page of Berliner Zeitung, which is a well-known newspaper and very right-wing newspaper, there was a picture of me being led off by the riot police, and the headline of the newspaper, this was on the front page, was 100 anti-Semitic Palestinians interrupt a Jewish commemoration, and the image was of a Jewish person being led off. And the second thing is what led to me losing my latest professorship was an article, again, by a right-wing newspaper called Die Welt. And this was written by one person who, had gone through my entire history of social media and activism, and wrote, a totally libelous, crazy article, but it had its effect because the university had only one possible kind of response to it. So just to point to the kind of the amount of gaslighting and also the amount of lies in the German mainstream media.
Thank you.
I can come in quickly, Matt, just with 2 points related to the last 2 questions. One, in pointing out to the peculiar positioning of the German left in regards to anything that is related to Palestine, I would like to note that before the last 6 months and the ongoing genocidal onslaught on Gaza, when the demonstrations were banned in 2022, there was a deafening silence among the leftist or left organizations, political parties, individuals, famous outspoken personas we would have expected them going out to question, actually not allowing organizations and activists into the street in a peaceful commemoration in a state that tries to sell itself as the place where memory is being, like they put out their culture of memory of the Holocaust as a brand of Germany. So we were shocked that for over 2 years, rarely anybody from these organizations actually challenged the state, challenged the police, or put out a statement in defense of a basic democratic right, which is a right of assembly and free speech. The same with the BDS resolution, which is, again, the coalition that challenged the resolution was not a coalition made of people who were active in the BDS movement, but rather people who thought that shutting down the democratic spaces of contest and of negotiations and activism is not gonna lead to any good of people who are living in a democratic society. The second thing I wanted to quickly mention that in the long letter of the police banning those demonstrations that my colleague Noura had referred to, so the racial profiling of the people who go to these demonstrations is very apparent and central to those claims. So more than once, and the police does not hide it, does not try to use a different language. I can give other quotes from the same letter that refer to the clientele, the people who go to these demonstrations as Muslim, the Arab, the Palestinian community that will be highly emotionalized, that are not averse to violence. And mind you that the last 3-4 years, most of these demonstrations were referred to as the places where there's music, it's beautiful, it brings community together, etc. And one more thing that was mentioned in the letter, and it's something also peculiar to Germany. It's a term now, I think people who speak better German than me can maybe mention it. It's something that says like Israel-related anti-Semitism. It's its own kind of anti-Semitism. So there is anti-Semitism that we all know what it is, more or less. Despite the fact that, of course, as Wieland said, there is intentional misconstruing of what it means. It can be demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations, or demonstrations for a ceasefire. They can be construed as anti-Semitism, but clearly Germany and the German state is trying to push forward a new agenda, which it's not about the Jewish life or the caring of the Jewish life, neither in Germany nor outside of Germany, but rather the protection of the state of Israel as a Zionist state. So not any kind of state, but a specific definition of that state. So any criticism of that entity, it's now construed as anti-Semitic.
Thank you, Yasmin. Let's hear from, I see 2 hands. Let's hear from Andy first, and then Wieland, please.
Yes, I'd like to thank all of the speakers for this really, really informative panel first. And to ask, uh, how would you like to see the broader international peace and justice community provide support, both for the work being done in Germany and also for those at the forefront of this work everywhere? And that's addressed to whoever would like to answer it.
That's
Wieland
any.
has his hand up.
No, I had my hand up for something else. I'm not sure I can answer that question.
I guess, what are the actual things or the tactile, tangible things that folks can do to provide support right now? Let's say if your groups actually needed support on the ground, or if there are actions that we could take in our homes to draw attention to these issues. One thing that I know is because it's been so difficult to get attention or accountability within Germany going through the regular governance or forms of accountability. One of the tactics has been to use international media to get attention, to shame Germany because it's not happening from within. So that's one of the tactics that we've been using as groups from within Germany. It's one of the reasons why we've tried to bring letters to international organizations and NGOs and IGOs to draw attention of what's happening. And that's part of why we're doing this event. So Andy, I know you already know these things as one of the people who put this event together, but is there someone who's on the ground in Berlin or other parts of Germany who could speak to what the folks on the call from the United States or other parts of the world could do to support? And this is, this could be also expanded not just to your work, but also directly to the folks in Gaza who this is really about at the end of the day.
I think what's already good is to compare the forms of repression, no? Because when I hear from Barbara's talk, I see that there are already also similarities. I mean, even if Germany is more intense, I think there's specific strategies to silence. And I think it's also good to have kind of collective learning around it, no? So to also understand that it's not only in Germany the case, but also maybe in other contexts. And yeah, you mentioned media attention. I'm teaching students from the US here in Berlin, and I felt they were quite aware about the situation in Germany, and I was surprised even before they came. So I think it's also something which is important to put pressure also on Germany to, yeah, to make them realize, or the government or institutions realize that that they are watched also in a way.
Okay, let's hear from Wieland, and then also from Richard has his hand up, so we can go to Richard afterwards.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about how strongly what the mainstream calls the fight against anti-Semitism is steeped in racism. Recently, a couple of I don't know, organizations that sort of claim to be monitoring anti-Semitism published a little report about us, Jüdische Stimme, trying to frame us as whatever extremists who are encouraging anti-Semitism. And as well as sort of just collecting some things about our history and our sort of social media output, there were also a couple of quotes from, a couple of politicians and some people from NGOs whom clearly they had asked to say something about us that they could use as propaganda against us. And one quote was particularly revealing. It was from a member of parliament from the Left Party, and she's one of their senior figures. She's actually the vice the deputy president of the German parliament. I mean, it's a somewhat symbolic role, but nonetheless, she has a certain standing. And I was quite surprised to see her refer to a specific action that we had carried out at a demonstration, both in Berlin and Frankfurt, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, on the 27th of January, where we had used a poster saying "never again" means never again for anyone, and saying that, you know, if you want to commemorate the Holocaust, then you have to look at the genocide in Gaza as well. And she denounced this as Holocaust, as downplaying the Holocaust, you know, relativizing, they call it here, and said that we were like distorting memory culture for the purpose of anti-Semitic propaganda. And I think this is very revealing, because the idea that somehow universalizing this "never again," extending it beyond merely the Jews who were killed by the Nazis, that is somehow an outrageous demand, and that this is essentially anti-Semitic. This just shows how little what the German establishment calls fighting anti-Semitism has to do with fighting against discrimination of any kind. And it's the complete failure also to understand anti-Semitism as just one phenomenon on the spectrum of racism. And it shows also how the German establishment takes offense, in a sense, if you take the Holocaust out of their hands and out of the narrow frame within which they're keeping it. You know, because, for example, so they more or less ignore the Roma and Sinti victims of the Holocaust, who were also subject to a genocide. You know, because they are people of color. You can see the racism is so obvious. And so these people, like this politician, even when they're claiming a moral position of opposing anti-Semitism, even then they display their racism. And so this is really, you know, we're not just, as an organization, it's not just about Zionism. We're an anti-racist and anti-colonial organization too. And it's hard in Germany just to get across the message that all these things have to be combined, and that fighting anti-Semitism without fighting racism as a whole and without solidarity between groups is meaningless.
Thanks. I just want to add one thing that you know comes up to me is that also if they control the narrative on the discussion and discourse around the Holocaust and what you're allowed to say about the Holocaust, what you're allowed to say about genocide, if you're not allowed to make comparisons to modern day, then you're not equipped. They take away the tools to prevent the ongoing genocide. And that's something that I've observed, having been surrounded by police after giving a speech because they didn't like something I said. And then they asked me for my address because they needed to check on me, they said. So these are the kinds of things that really are meant to intimidate and limit the discourse. Richard had his hand up. Richard, would you like to go ahead? Richard, you're still muted if you're trying to unmute. Are you able to unmute, Richard, or should we move on?
You could unmute him, Matt.
I actually don't have the ability. I'm trying, I'm clicking, and I only have the ability to chat and pin. Andy, could you unmute Richard?
You can't unmute people, you can only mute them.
I can ask to unmute, which I have done, but
Okay, thanks. All right, we're coming into
That working now?
yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it was my fault. Richard Forward, member since 1983 of the Munich American Peace Committee. a group of United States citizens and some German working for peace and disarmament and preventing war in Munich and in other parts of the world, with many of the peace organizations in Europe. And I'd just like to say something about this criticism of certain persons or groups of people who have said obviously wrong things. And our experience has been over many years that we have to talk to these people too, that there are misunderstandings. And of course, somebody who's vice, whatever it is, of the Bundestag is hard to reach. But talking about all this in detail about anti-Deutsch, so Munich is a rich city, but also a very big city, 1.5 million, with a metropolitan area of 2 million. And a lot of these things I have not experienced here. We had large demonstrations against the Munich Security Conference here, in which a large group of Palestinian Speaks, thank you, did a wonderful contribution to and very visible contribution to the demonstration, and they were widely respected. They spoke beautiful German, better than my English, and I think that this is the only way for us to be visible, is to make ourselves very visible. And this is only once a year. It is not enough. But let's not pick on people, and talk to the people in the left party. Talk to the people who are talking about anti-Deutsch. I haven't heard of that here, and there are many students. The student movement here is very active in the peace movement, and they really bring vitalized energy to a lot of us old timers. And it's so important to have dialogue and to have arguments and to respect these people. And I think
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. We have one more hand up, and then we're probably going to have to come around to closing. So, Elza, I saw your hand. If you could try to keep it to 30 seconds or a minute.
Oh, I'll try. It's a big new topic. I feel that we should understand that this anti-Deutsch, the rise of that and the sharpness of that this has been going on for some time, even before the 7th of October. The last 2 years, I've observed this. I'm a German American living in Berlin. I've also worked a lot with Richard and Munich American Peace Organization. We've done everything from helping deserters here during the Iraq War. I've been living here since the 90s. I grew up in the States. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was here in the 68 period also as a student. So I'm noticing that the anti-Deutsch are coming into our big traditional wonderful German peace organizations like the DFG-VK, it's called the German Peace Society, or ATTACK, and they are trying to take it apart from within and immobilize them, as far as I can see, with regard to other issues. For example, being against NATO, for example, being against sending arms to Ukraine. It's becoming we have to see it politically, the intention of some of this more broadly. And in the case of the DFG-VK, which is called German Peace Society, and United War Resisters, which is a pacifist organization, part of the War Resistance International and all of that. And many of people were conscious objectors, German and so forth, older generation. I've been a member of that since 2008 and originally joined it because I was helping U.S. GIs together with Munich American Peace who were resisting the Iraq War and so forth, were stationed here in Germany and all that. And so they've been very good. And we have, with that organization and several others, Germany is is the only NATO country, as far as I know, where it's still illegal for German soldiers to actually use armed drones. We have won that struggle year after year in the Bundestag. I'm not saying we can hold the line, but this is what the peace movement has been able to do in pushing back against the transatlantic narrative. And the anti-Deutsche, we have a cell that came in the Berlin, where I live, the local organization. They've taken 3 memberships of the board, of the national board of the DFG-VK. They've made accusations to leading peace activists, the ones leading the anti-atomic war thing in Buchel, a woman, another one who is the major anti-weapons expert in, I won't name them here, but they have been called anti-Semitic within the organization. They're getting accused of that. I'm getting accused of that. My association with Code Pink is being brought up because we won just 8 years ago, a giant struggle where Code Pink was being called anti-Semitic. It was not supposed to get a peace prize. It had gotten one of the major peace prizes, Aachen Peace Prize in 2014, 2016. We're invited for Bayreuth Peace Prize Tolerance. That's the end. And the thing is, we won that in the city council by demonstrating criticism against Israel is not anti-Semitism. The whole 7 of 8 of 9 German factions in that city council agreed with us on that and restored our prize from when the mayor took it away in Jerusalem Post. This was where we were before. Now the whole peace movement is being disabled partly by these anti-Semitism accusations from within, like a real McCarthy or in the unions of the U.S. and how the unions were taken apart with that.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you, Elsa.
I'd say put it in that larger context also.
Yeah. We have only a couple minutes left. I did want to throw it back to the speakers if there was anything else that they'd like to add very briefly that they might want to give as a piece of advice, a piece of wisdom, an action that folks can take. That was the question from Andy. But we probably only have enough time for one person, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jackie Cabasso, UFPJ's co-convener, to close us out. So any of the speakers, you could just unmute yourself and jump in. Any closing thoughts? Okay, well, I'm not going to pressure you, but thank you very much. It's been a really interesting discussion. I know we could talk about this on and on and on. I think it's been eye-opening for the folks from the United States. I'm getting messages here thanking me for the panel that we put together. So you've all been incredible. Thank you for taking the time. And I hope that this leads also to greater discussions and solidarity between the movements. The video will be shared. We can also share links to the organization so folks can stay in touch. But yeah, sincerely, thank you. This has been something that I've wanted to do for more than a couple months, and I'm glad that we've been able to do it. The last thing I'd like to say is, again, this isn't just about us or what's happening in the United States or in Germany. The reason that we're all here is for the people who are suffering today in Gaza and in Palestine. And I would just like to, spend a moment thinking about them and holding them in our hearts at this very, very damned time. So with that, thank you, everyone. And I'd like to pass it to Jackie.
Thank you, Matt. So my name is Jackie Cabasso. I'm the national co-convener of United for Peace and Justice. And I want to thank everybody. I think this has been an extraordinary presentation. We've touched on incredibly deep, profound, and sensitive issues that are not discussed enough. And I'm very proud that United for Peace and Justice was able to provide the space to do that. So I would like to invite everybody to donate if you are so moved. Any little bit helps. I put the link in the chat, and also encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter and action alerts, and I put the link in for there. And then just a little bit further up the chat, Andy posted a link to our very extensive resource page on Israel and Gaza, which Andy maintains and is constantly updated and very useful. So again, thanks to Matt for bringing this proposal to us. Thanks to Andy for pulling it together. Thanks to George for opening, and thanks to each and every one of our remarkable German presenters. Thank you all for taking the time on a Sunday, and let's keep this conversation going. I also encourage our German colleagues to keep in touch. Send us articles that you would like us to include in our monthly newsletter, and let's keep this conversation going and broaden it farther and farther. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, all the speakers. Take care.